I got into a really weird one with the Daily Mail, only once. Or they got into a weird one with me, which was, and it is mentioned in the book actually, in the piece about statues. I was on a committee that was looking at what to do about the 4th plinth in Trafalgar Square. There are 3 plinths that have colonial murderers and monarchs, and then there was 1 plinth that they ran out of money and they didn't have anybody on it. And so that's literally what, that is a very fair indication of what was going on. And it had been decided by Parliament that works of modern art should go on this plinth. Livingston asked me and a group of other people, will you work out a kind of way to select these things on the plinth? I was made the chair of that body because everybody else was in the arts world and they wanted someone who wasn't in the arts world. It was like one meeting every 2 months. Like, It was one of those things, I barely remembered that I was doing it until the Queen Mum died, which had nothing to do with me. And I swear. And Simon Hughes was standing for mayor and he said the Queen Mum should go on the plinth, which was a mental idea because it was an equestrian plinth. She wasn't known for riding horses. You could have had her as a centaur, I guess, or like it was just like a mad idea. But the Daily Mail took it up, and then they saw who was the chair of the committee, and they went nuts. And it went over 3 days, carve her name in pride. And it was all about saving our history from these people. And I was these people. Took them a day to get a picture so that they could show that, like, these people, look at him, like those people, really. And they did, on day 3, they did Thoughts of Chairman Gary. And they had, it's a good headline. Yeah. And they had all of these things that they'd quoted out of context. And one of the things that it made me realise when they did that was how careful I had been. Yeah. That they had to quote me out of context. That they kind of had to distort what I was saying. And that the carefulness was in anticipation of exactly that, even though I didn't anticipate that exact thing happening. But knowing, and there have been particular moments, particularly when Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party, and I just not thinking that was a terrible thing was haram. And during the Iraq War and after 9/11 through to about 2005, where there was a certain kind of person who was waiting for you to make a mistake, to pounce on you, for you to do anything that was intemperate, and I kind of envied the capacity of other columnists just to go off on one, because I never felt that I kind of entirely had that luxury. The one time I did it, I don't exactly regret it, but I did do a piece called I Hate Tories. And so a friend of mine saw it and they said, and I thought, they've just gone and put a terrible headline on your piece, but that is exactly what your piece was about, wasn't it? And I was like, yeah. And I make a distinction, not the people who vote for them necessarily, but the ones who actually do all the stuff. But with the exception of that one piece, everything was qualified, always. And so you never really get rid of those imaginary people. You just find different ways to deal with them, because you're in a very you're actually quite vulnerable, as bold as it may seem. Whenever I did, it's not like I got loads of them, but whenever I did get an award, I would feel that it was cover. That it was a thing that would hopefully make some of the more gratuitous attacks less likely.
But you're also nervous about another thing, which is you felt that you had been given the space and that if you messed it up, then that was an indictment of having a black journalist in that space. Because there's a really funny part in the book where you say you got advice from white editors, and between brackets, the only kind of editors there were. And then you got advice from white journalists, between brackets, the only kinds of journalists there were. And so you were, for a long time, probably until very recently, the only sort of writer of colour, a black journalist, doing this kind of stuff, talking about not only British politics, diaspora politics, American politics. The range for even a white journalist was quite remarkable, and the freedom of that. But you felt that every time you filed, it was potentially the tarnishing, finally, of that decision to have a black journalist in that position.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one. I mean, I've never been there are people who talk about, being ambassadors.
Yeah.
And I always think, look, ambassadors get huge cars. Really nice. Like, give me some of that. Maybe I'll be an ambassador. But, this job, being a black journalist, it don't come with that much money.
Yeah.
It's definitely no big cars and nice houses. And I was always very conscious. Nobody elected me. Right, that kind of this notion of you're the voice for the voiceless, and I would think actually they have a voice.
Yeah.
Nobody elected me. I'm not a representative, and yet when there are so few of you, and this also worked for a certain kind of political persuasion too.
Yes.
That you felt what James Baldwin would call the burden of representation. Like, if I don't write about this, who will? And there was this thing that would happen when I started out where the older white journalists would say, either don't write about race, you'll be pigeonholed, always in the passive voice. Mm. So no agent, no subject, I mean, you were just the object of this thing. Or only write about race. That's what we want you for. So the first column that I ever wrote for The Guardian was spiked because it was about Bosnia, and I was told, well, we've got people who can do that,
And that it needed a racial sensibility.
Yeah, we want something with more of an ethnic sensibility.
In Bosnia.
I was like, Bosnia has a lot of ethnic sensibility. It's the one thing they're not lacking.
They don't need any more.
And so an awful lot of my challenge, particularly in column writing, but not exclusively, was to insist on my right, really, to write about race if I wanted to, and to not write about race